One of the points of this series is to show how one man with a smartphone can make an entire half-hour show and a series of 43 shows on his own. Nobody else. He writes the music, he does the talk, he has the script and he presents it, all for virtually no cost. But for this show, I decided to take the public transport to Liverpool Street Station and then up to Cambridge. I'd been invited to my old college, Trinity Cambridge. They have an annual picnic once a year in the summer where everyone and their families are invited to have delicious food, nice music, and some sunshine in deck chairs in the quads of the college. Since I'm incredibly old now, I've been given a freedom pass, which means I can travel on the underground and on buses all over London. And I use it a great deal because I love it. I find it very efficient, incredibly clean compared to when I used to go on the underground, which was all dead cigarettes and crisp packets all over the place. Very fast, usually very efficient when they're not striking. So I went to Liverpool Street on the tube. It can get a bit crowded, but as long as I get a seat, who cares? I was at Trinity College, Cambridge, as a teenager, an undergraduate student. I managed to study English literature and history mainly, and I ended up getting my Master of Arts degree. Before I started at Cambridge, my mother, who was an extremely intelligent lady and a very good mother, decided since I had 9 months before I started at Cambridge, I should take that time to travel around the world and see the world. So she gave me a round-the-world ticket from London to Auckland in New Zealand and back, which is exactly around the world, and enough money to eat and sleep somewhere every day, every night, which was 50 pence a day. Can you imagine then, back in 1963 or 64, existing on 50p a day, which meant I stayed basically in youth hostels, YMCAs, and ate junk food, but the local equivalent. I actually had a fabulous time, but in many ways I hated that time because there I was, age 17 or 18, and I decided I was going to be the big superstar of the decade, and along came this bloody group called the Beatles and stole my crown. I was terribly annoyed. As I went round the world, I insisted that my mum sent me to every Thomas Cook in every city I went to a copy of that week's New Musical Express so I could see what was going on in the world. and that was the basis of some of the great adventures I had. When I got to Australia on my round-the-world trip, I'd managed to save up enough of my 50 pence a night to afford to stay for one night at the very expensive Southern Cross Hotel in Melbourne. Why? Because the Beatles were there that day. They were performing that night in a stadium, and Brian Epstein would be there. And I could meet Brian Epstein, and he could turn me into the superstar that this 17-year-old was determined to be. So I got there, I booked in, and I picked up the phone, and I asked for Mr. Brian Epstein's suite, please. And I was put through, and the phone was answered by Derek Taylor, who was the publicist for the Beatles at the time. And he said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Brian has gone off to Hawaii on holiday, and I'm looking after things here. Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I really want to meet Brian Epstein because I want to be a superstar." And Derek, who was one of the nicest men I ever knew, plus also one of the best writers I'd ever known, said, he's in Hawaii. Are you planning to go to Hawaii on your trip? And I said, well, yes, actually, after Australia, I'm in New Zealand, and then I'm going to Fiji, and then I'll be in Hawaii. And he said, well, why don't you when you get to Hawaii, give him a call at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel and go and visit him. I'm sure he'd be delighted to see someone English. And I said, thank you very much. And I took the details down to phone him, and that was it. And I then shot off to New Zealand, quickly did Auckland and Wellington, zipped off to Fiji, quickly did Fiji, and then zipped to the Hawaiian islands, to Honolulu, Waikiki, and on my way to go to see Brian at his hotel, I stopped at the Thomas Cook office, picked up my copy of that week's New Musical Express sent by my wonderful mum, and arrived at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel where Brian was on the beach in a deck chair. And I went down. He said, oh, lovely to meet you. Is that the New Musical Express you've got? And I said, yes. He said, oh, my God, I've missed that like crazy. Would you mind if I have a read of it? Seized it from me, read it from cover to cover, then handed it back to me and said, that's the best thing that's ever happened in my life. Thank you so much, Kenneth, because my name then was Kenneth King. And we then chatted for about 2 or 3 hours and became really close friends. I miss Brian to this day. When he died, he was only the second person I'd known who died, my father being the first. Brian gave me some very good advice and contacts. When I got to Los Angeles, on his advice, I contacted a record producer called Tommy Lipuma, who immediately saw me. He produced, amongst other things, Guantanamera by the Sandpipers, one of the great records of all time, and a huge hit by then. Tommy was at A&M Records, and he gave me some very good advice. And then when I got back to London, I contacted the Beatles' publisher, Dick James, who was also incredibly nice and very helpful. And his main advice was, look, Jonathan, Kenneth, these tracks you played me are not too bad, but I tell you what the real problem is. They sound like everything else except not quite as strong. They really need to be something different in order to catch people's ears. And I thought, well, that's easier said than done, but took the advice on board and then headed up to Cambridge, where my mother took me in her car with all my stuff. We got to Cambridge, and where the digs I'd been allocated in for my first year as a junior undergraduate at Trinity College, Cambridge, was in Jesus Lane. We arrived there, and I went in to meet the landlady, a lady called Miss Slack, and I came out white and shaking, and my mother said, what's the matter? And I said, she's covered in warts. And Miss Slack was indeed covered from head to foot in warts, not just little warts, but huge pendulous dangling warts on strings hanging from every part of her anatomy. Well, I say every part of her anatomy. I'm glad to say I only saw the parts that were visible, but they were all, literally every inch, every centimetre, pendulous warts. But as it happens, I suppose they weren't catchy, or she'd never have allowed to have been a landlady. I installed myself in my little room there. There was an empty room up the top of the house, so I commandeered that and put in that the television aerial. Remember, these were the days before such things as online and wires and things. I had this huge aerial in the spare room up the top, with a wire coming down into my little black and white television in my room so I could watch it. And I settled in there for my first year at Cambridge. But as I said earlier, I hated it. Why? Because there I was, a teenager, almost in my 20s, and I actually was not yet the world's greatest living superstar. And I found that incredibly frustrating and annoying. I tried and tried and tried, and I was so stressed that I developed a duodenal ulcer. And as a result, I ended up spending a few weeks, even I think a couple of months, in the sort of college sanatorium, which was just opposite Trinity College. A room there where I had to stay in bed and do nothing but drink milk and eat sort of mashed fish, basically baby food, while my ulcer healed. That was the way that doctors and medicine healed ulcers in those days. Well, I got through all my books for my college work in literally a week or so because I loved reading, and all my work was read lots of novels and write essays about them. I found that unbelievably easy. I didn't consider that work, and that was pleasure. And I did it all in a week. So after the week, I was lying there bored, and the one thing that was driving me crazy was, why aren't I a star yet? So I wrote to everybody I could think of in the music industry, including a DJ who was on Radio Luxembourg, a man called Tony Hall, who was also at the time head of promotion at Decca Records. And to my astonishment, I got a letter back from Tony Hall saying, come in and see me when you're next in London. So I did, and the rest is history. Tony Hall was a wonderful man, and he advised me to producers Joe Roncaroni and Ken Jones.
Green is the grass, blue is the sky, bright is the sun above, lonely am I, lonely am I. My girl's gone away, she left the other night, went with another boy, out of love, out of sight. Green is the grass, blue is the sky, bright is the sun above, lonely am I, lonely am I. She thought I didn't mind, thought love just wasn't there. She simply didn't know how I'd cry, how I'd care. I want her loving back, I need her kiss again, for that alone can stop certain tears, certain pain. Green is the grass, blue is the sky, bright is the sun above, lonely am I, lonely am lonely am I.
Tony Hall had 3 protégés he used to see, all of us public school boys, me at Charterhouse, Andrew Lloyd Webber, who was at Westminster, and Tim Rice, who was at Lancing. And we used to sit outside Tony's office until end of work time, and then we'd all troop in and he'd give us advice, spending at least an hour chatting to these 3 teenagers, all of whom wanted to be successful in music. Music was very much a working class kids kind of scene in the middle 60s. Public school types tended to become accountants or bankers or lawyers, so us 3 were rather unusual. Anyway, strolling around Cambridge as I was, I came up with this idea for a song that was sort of based on the lyrics of Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and slightly sent them up. And I played it to Ken and Joe and they went, wow, that is the single. It was called Everyone's Gone to the Moon.
Streets full of people, all alone. Roads full of houses, never home. Church full of singing, out of tune. Everyone's gone to the moon. Eyes full of sorrow, never wet. Hands full of money, all in debt. Sun coming out in the middle of June. Everyone's gone to the moon. Long time ago, life had begun. Everyone went to the sun. Hearts full of motors, painted green. Mouths full of chocolate, covered cream. Arms that can only lift a spoon. Everyone's gone to the moon. Everyone's gone to the moon. Everyone's gone to the moon.
At last I was a superstar, 9 million selling record which I written, but what I really wanted to do was not be a pop singer, but actually be a producer. And so whilst enjoying the status of being a pop singer and staying at Cambridge, I turned down the offer of £1,000 a night on a 60-night tour of Britain as second on the bill to my hero at the time, Gene Pitney, because I wanted to stay at Cambridge and complete my education there 2 further years, because I loved literature and I loved reading and I wasn't prepared to give up what I loved doing. But I also wanted to produce, and I wrote a second song, found a band in Cambridge who were actually servicemen in the Air Force nearby, who were playing in Cambridge and at the Corn Exchange, called the Hedgehoppers. I turned their name into Hedgehoppers Anonymous because I knew they'd never really be famous, and recorded actually with session men, not them, but the lead singer singing a song that I'd written at the same time as Everyone's Gone to the Moon, whilst wandering around Cambridge and also enjoying myself punting down the River Cam with my girlfriend at the time, Sandy Shaw, who was also a pop singer in the 60s, and basically wrote, "It's Good News Week."
It's Good News Week. Someone's dropped a bomb somewhere, contaminating atmosphere and blackening the sky. It's Good News Week. Someone's found a way to give the rotting dead a will to live, go on and never die. Have you heard the news? What did it say? Who's won that race? What's the weather like today? It's Good News Week. Families check the need for coal by stimulating birth control. We're wanting less to eat. It's Good News Week. Doctors finding many ways of wrapping brains in metal trays to keep us from the heat. Someone's dropped a bomb somewhere, contaminating atmosphere and blackening the sky. It's Good News Week. Someone's found a way to give the rotting dead a will to live, go on and never die. Have you heard the news? What did it say? Who's won that race? What's the weather like today? What's the weather like today? It's Good News Week. Families check the need for coal by stimulating birth control. We're wanting less to eat. It's Good News Week. Doctors finding many ways of wrapping brains in metal trays to keep us from the heat. To keep us from the heat. To keep us from the heat.
When I came down from Cambridge, I left a note with the porters to give to the person who was replacing me, the Prince of Wales. And I said in the note, "Your Highness, as a prince comes up to Cambridge, a king steps down. Welcome to Trinity." Actually, he's now King Charles. So King Charles and King Jonathan have shared the same bed. In the chapel, I notice there are marble statues of various famous past Trinity students: Tennyson, Newton, Bacon, Wordsworth, but nowhere do I see any sign of Jonathan King, or even Kenneth King as I was then. Mind you, they are mainly names of people who seem to have died, and I'm still alive. I notice, however, that Byron is not featured either, perhaps for similar reasons. It was a lovely day in Cambridge, looking at all my old haunts. This is Caius College, Gonville and Caius, where many of my friends from Charterhouse stayed, so I used to spend a lot of time here with them. And also, incidentally, over in Oxford, I used to drive from one to the other. These days, getting to Cambridge is far easier, just an hour on the train. It used to be a nightmare driving, as I always did, both from London and when I went to Oxford and back to Cambridge, literally hours and hours of driving. Still, I was young and lovely then. Well, young anyway. But a good time. I had a good time. I enjoyed myself. It was great fun for my second and third years, by which time I was a superstar. I wrote a regular column called King's Parade in Varsity, which I still have copies of, and still remain friends with many of the people from my Cambridge time. Anyway, after spending the day there, I got the train back down to London, where my little house is literally just on the edge of the Notting Hill Carnival area. I bought my little house in London for £18,650, which was most of the royalties I received from Everyone's Gone to the Moon. And I bought it literally in the second year of the Notting Hill Carnival. So I was here all the way through all the various Notting Hill Carnivals. And it's going on at this very moment. Interesting to note that back in 1971, I actually had the most played track in the Notting Hill Carnival. It was called Johnny Reggae by the Piglets. I wrote it and produced it, and I'll sign off from A Victim Bites Back Show 43 by giving you Johnny Reggae and the Piglets.
What's he like, Mavis? He's a real tasty geezer. He's grown his hair a bit, but it's smooth, not too long. And he wears a baseball shirt with a number 17 on. He looks great in his big white basketball boots. He's stupid over football and he looks me in the eye when he shoots. Reggae, 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 here comes Johnny Reggae. Johnny Reggae, reggae, lay it on me. Reggae, 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 here comes Johnny Reggae. Johnny Reggae, reggae, lay it on me. He'll always start a fight for me. He's always on the phone. At the dance hall in the evening, he'll always take me home. In his fringe and buckle stompers and his two-tone tonic strides. He's a real tasty geezer, and I'm his here inside. Reggae, 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 here comes Johnny Reggae. Johnny Reggae, reggae, lay it on me.